The Forbidden Discovery. The vastness of the galaxy was full of mysteries, many of which had yet to be discovered. Few people knew the true depth of what was out there, and fewer still understood the rules that governed it. Among the stars, there were whispers about a forbidden law, one that no one dared break. Humans are off limits, it said, a rule that had kept humanity hidden for centuries. But no one knew why, not truly. Until now. On a small, barely charted planet, a group of explorers uncovered something that would change everything. The team, led by Captain Ella Harris, had come to the planet seeking nothing more than the usual. Rare minerals, a few samples, and some data for their mission report. It was supposed to be another ordinary trip into the unknown. They had no idea that they were about to break a rule that had been kept hidden from the galaxy for so long. The planet was desolate, with jagged cliffs and dusty plains stretching for miles. The explorers had landed in a region known for its lack of life. It was perfect for their mission. No distractions, no surprises, or so they thought. Ella and her crew set up their camp near a long-abandoned outpost that had been discovered years ago. The structure, old and weathered, stood against the harsh environment like a silent monument. The explorers had seen it before, but they hadn't expected to find anything useful. It had been abandoned by its creators long ago, and it was assumed to be little more than a relic. But as they began their scans and drills, something unusual appeared on the edge of their radar, a faint signal, hidden beneath layers of rock. Curiosity sparked. Ella made the call to investigate. The team dug into the rock face, carefully uncovering what looked like an ancient vault. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The design was strange, filled with symbols and markings they couldn't decipher. There was no doubt, it was alien in origin. For hours, they worked to access the vault. Finally, after much effort, the vault door creaked open. The air inside was stale, and the darkness seemed to stretch on forever. But as Ella stepped inside, she felt an undeniable pull, like something was waiting for them. She signaled to her crew to follow, and together they ventured deeper. The vault's interior was far more advanced than anything they could have imagined. Strange holograms flickered to life as they moved, showing scenes of ancient civilizations, some known to the galaxy and others completely unknown. There was one thing that stood out in every image, however: humans. The holograms depicted humans interacting with these ancient species, but the images didn't show humanity as peaceful explorers. No, the humans in these images were surrounded by terror and violence. Ella's heart raced. She turned to her team. This isn't just a forgotten vault. It's a warning. The further they went, the more the message became clear. The vault contained records of a lost war, a conflict that had taken place millennia ago. It seemed that humanity was involved in a battle that involved several ancient races, a war so dangerous that it had been erased from all records. The galaxy's most powerful species had fought against humanity and nearly wiped them out. But even as they uncovered more, they couldn't understand why. Why had humans been so dangerous? Why had they been erased from history? And then, in the deepest part of the vault, they found it, a final message. It was a single line, etched into a metal plate in an ancient language. As Ella ran her translator over it, the words became clear. Humans are off limits. The message was clear and chilling. The moment they read those words, a loud crack echoed through the vault. The doors slammed shut, and the lights flickered. Something was wrong. Ella's instincts told her that they had triggered something they weren't supposed to. A warning system, perhaps. Panic spread through the team as they rushed to open the vault door, but it wouldn't budge. Then, in the distance, they heard it, a low rumbling sound, like something massive was approaching. The ground beneath their feet trembled. The explorers rushed to their ship, their hearts pounding. They could feel it now. The eyes of something ancient and powerful were watching them. They had uncovered something the galaxy had tried to forget, and now they were paying the price. The ship's systems powered up as the team hurriedly prepared for takeoff, but the ground was shaking harder. The vault's discovery had triggered something far bigger than they had imagined. Ella looked out the ship's window and saw something that chilled her to the bone. An enormous shadow rising in the distance. It was too far to identify, but the size alone was enough to send a shiver down her spine. Before they could lift off, a new message appeared on the ship's screen. This time, it was a warning. A galaxy-wide broadcast had just been sent, broadcasted to every corner of the universe. It was clear now. Humanity had broken the law, and the consequences would be devastating. Ella's hands shook as she gripped the controls. The message had only one line: the humans are off limits. It was too late. The galaxy had heard the forbidden discovery, and the horror that would follow had already begun. The ship lifted off with a loud roar, its engines working furiously to escape the rapidly shaking ground beneath them. Ella's hands were steady on the controls, but her mind was anything but calm. The galaxy had heard their discovery, and now they were paying the price. The rumbling from below wasn't just the vault's warning mechanism. It was something far worse, something ancient and terrifying. As the ship ascended, the enormous shadow that Ella had seen on the ground seemed to stretch higher and higher. It loomed like a massive dark cloud on the horizon. She didn't know what it was, but she could feel its power. It was no longer just a distant threat. It was coming for them, and they had only moments to figure out what to do next. "Captain, the communication system is picking up something strange," said Lieutenant Markson, the ship's tech specialist. "It's like a transmission, but it's not from any known species." Ella's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What's it saying?" Markson's face turned pale as he adjusted the controls. "It's not words. It's more like a signal, something that feels wrong. It's spreading across the galaxy." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The vault's warning was one thing, but this was different. This was a signal sent out across the stars, one that none of them had ever encountered before. Something was out there, something that had been awakened by their discovery. And whatever it was making its way across the galaxy, reaching every corner of the known universe. "This is bad," Ella muttered, her voice tense. She looked at the rest of the crew, their faces full of worry. "We need to get back to the nearest station. Fast. There's no telling what this could mean." The ship's engines hummed as they sped through the atmosphere, racing toward the nearest safe zone. But no matter how fast they went, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that they were running toward something even worse. The galaxy had its rules, rules that were set in place for a reason, and they had just broken one of the most forbidden ones. As they flew through space, the crew tried to make sense of the situation. They ran scans, trying to determine the origin of the mysterious signal. But every attempt was met with failure. It was as if the signal itself was blocking their systems, keeping them from learning anything more. The only thing they knew for sure was that it was spreading, and it was making its way toward them. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy was starting to react. News of their discovery spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of powerful factions and species across the stars. The message that had been sent, the one that warned of the forbidden humans, echoed in every corner of space. And as it spread, the reactions were immediate and terrifying. On one of the most powerful worlds in the galaxy, the ruling council gathered in urgent emergency sessions. The council was made up of the galaxy's most influential beings, each one from a different species. They had all heard the message, and they knew what it meant. "The humans are off limits," the council leader, a tall, imposing alien with multiple eyes, said, his voice low and filled with dread. "For millennia, this rule has kept the galaxy in balance. Now that balance is in danger. We cannot allow this to go unpunished." "But why?" one of the other members asked, fear creeping into their voice. "What did humanity do that was so terrible? Why are they off limits?" The leader sighed. "It's not about what they did. It's about what they can do. The humans were once a species of unimaginable power, a power that was so dangerous, so uncontrollable, that the galaxy's oldest races decided it was better to erase them, to make them a forgotten species. But they were erased. The member protested. They were supposed to be extinct. How could this be possible? The leader's expression grew dark. It wasn't just the humans we erased. It was their history, their legacy. Every trace of them was wiped from every record, every database. They were kept off limits for a reason. And now, it seems, they've been found. The Council's discussion grew more frantic. They knew that if humanity was allowed to resurface, if they were allowed to reclaim their place in the galaxy, there would be no stopping them. The balance would be shattered. Meanwhile, far away, the explorers on Ella's ship were still reeling from their discovery. They had barely managed to escape the planet's surface, but the sense of impending danger still loomed over them. As they made their way through space, they could sense something else. It wasn't just the signal. It was a growing sense of dread. Something was coming, and it was coming for them. "Captain, I think we've got a problem," Lieutenant Markson said, his voice trembling. Ella turned to face him. "What is it?" "I just finished scanning the signal, and I think I know what it is," Markson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a call to arms, and we're the target." The words hit Ella like a punch to the gut. The galaxy wasn't just reacting. They were mobilizing. They were sending ships, fleets, armies, and they were coming for humanity. "Brace yourselves," Ella ordered. "We're not just running from a signal. We're running from the galaxy's wrath." But even as the ship sped away from the planet, even as they tried to outrun the coming storm, Ella knew one thing. There was no escaping what they had unleashed. The forbidden rule had been broken, and the consequences were coming for them. The galaxy was about to change forever. Ella's fingers gripped the ship's controls tightly, her knuckles white with tension. The hum of the engines seemed louder now, almost as if the ship itself was nervous. It had been days since they left the forbidden planet, and the weight of their discovery felt heavier with every passing minute. The crew had been on high alert, but there was no way to prepare for what was coming. Lieutenant Markson, who had been monitoring the ship's systems, turned to Ella with a grim expression. "Captain, I've been tracking the signal. It's getting stronger, and it's not just us anymore. Others are picking it up too. We're being followed." Ella swallowed hard. "By who?" Markson hesitated. "I'm not sure yet. The signal's interference is too strong. But there are fleets out there, Captain. It's like they're waiting for us." The implication of his words hung in the air. Whoever, or whatever, was out there, they knew they had found something forbidden, something the galaxy had worked hard to erase, and they weren't going to let it slide. Ella turned to the rest of the crew. "Prepare for anything. We need to stay ahead of them. Keep me posted on any changes." The ship's sensors began to beep urgently, and a wave of cold dread swept over the crew. They had been in deep space for so long now that they were far from any known safe zones. The galaxy was vast, but it wasn't vast enough to escape the reach of its ancient, terrifying rules. As the ship moved further into the void, the crew began to notice something strange. It was subtle at first, a flicker on the edge of their radar, a shadow that moved unnaturally fast. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. Something was out there, and it wasn't friendly. "Captain, I think I've identified the fleet," Markson said, his voice trembling. "It's the Xal'Rak, the enforcers of the ancient laws." Ella's eyes widened. The Xal'Rak were one of the galaxy's oldest and most feared species, known for their brutal enforcement of the galaxy's most sacred rules. If they were involved, the situation was far worse than they had imagined. They didn't just enforce the law, they enforced extinction. "They're coming for us," Ella muttered, her voice barely audible. "And they won't stop until we're destroyed." The Xal'Rak fleet was known for its terrifying speed and advanced weaponry. If they were after humanity, there would be no escape. The rules of the galaxy were clear. Humans were forbidden, erased from history, and any trace of them would be met with swift and brutal retaliation. But the crew couldn't help but wonder, how did the Xal'Rak know humanity was still out there? The galaxy had worked hard to erase every trace of the humans, to make sure they were forgotten. So how had one small team of explorers stumbled upon the truth? As the hours passed, the tension grew unbearable. The crew was alert, every noise aboard the ship amplified in the eerie silence of deep space. Even the hum of the engines seemed to echo with a sense of impending doom. The Xal'Rak were closing in, and every second felt like it could be their last. Suddenly, the ship's lights flickered, and the sensors began to blare. Ella's heart raced as the ship's systems picked up a massive energy surge approaching fast. They were close, too close. "Brace for impact," Ella shouted. In the blink of an eye, the Xal'Rak ships emerged from the shadows of deep space. Their sleek, dark forms seemed to appear out of nowhere, surrounding Ella's ship from all sides. Their weaponry glowed with an ominous red light, signaling their intent to destroy. "Captain, they're charging their weapons," shouted Lieutenant Markson, his voice filled with panic. "We can't outrun them." Ella's mind raced. There had to be a way out. She couldn't let the crew die because of one mistake, because they had uncovered something that the galaxy had hidden for millennia. "Activate the cloaking system," Ella ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. The ship's cloaking system, though experimental, could hide them from the Xal'Rak's radar for a short time. But it wasn't a perfect solution. The ship could only remain hidden for a few minutes before the energy drain would leave them vulnerable. The crew scrambled to execute the order. The ship's systems hummed to life as the cloaking field enveloped them, rendering the ship nearly invisible to their pursuers. But the Xal'Rak ships weren't fooled for long. They had advanced technology that could pierce through most cloaking systems, and it was only a matter of time before they found them. As the cloaking field activated, Ella's heart pounded. This was their only chance. If they could make it to the nearest star system, they might be able to hide in its gravity well, throwing off their pursuers. But the Xal'Rak were relentless, and they wouldn't give up easily. "We need to make it to the Sci-Fi system," Ella said, her voice steady despite the growing fear. "It's our best shot." Markson nodded, his fingers flying over the console. "Calculating course now. We'll need to jump to hyperspace immediately." The ship's engines roared to life as Ella's crew made the jump into hyperspace, the stars around them stretching into streaks of light. They had no idea how long their cloak would last, or if the Xal'Rak would follow them into hyperspace. But they had no choice. They had to keep running. In the silence of hyperspace, the crew tried to catch their breath. But the fear still gripped them. They had made it for now. But the galaxy was a dangerous place for those who broke its most sacred rule. Ella sat in the cockpit, staring at the stars flashing by. She had uncovered humanity's forbidden past, and now the galaxy knew. It had unleashed a terror that was about to shake the very foundation of the universe, and now there was no going back. The ship's engines hummed steadily as Ella sat in the cockpit, her eyes fixed on the swirling colors of hyperspace. The danger was far from over, but for now, they were safe. Or at least, they hoped they were. "Captain," Markson's voice came over the comms, breaking the silence. "The cloaking system is holding. For now. But it won't last long. We need to find a way to shake them off." Ella clenched her fists on the controls, her mind racing. The Xal'Rak were one of the most advanced species in the galaxy, and their pursuit was relentless. They didn't just hunt, they hunted to destroy. Humanity had been erased from the galaxy for a reason, and the discovery of even the slightest trace of the human race was enough to summon the wrath of those who enforced the galaxy's darkest rules. "How long until we reach the Sci-Fi system?" Ella asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "It'll take a few more hours," Markson replied. "But we're already being tracked, Captain. The Xal'Rak won't give up easily. They'll follow us to the edge of the system if they have to. Ella's grip tightened. She knew the Xalarak wouldn't stop, not when they had a reason to erase the crew and anyone else who had uncovered the forbidden truth. "Can we jump to another system?" Ella asked. Markson paused for a moment, not without risking detection. "If we jump too early, they'll know where we're going. We need to time this perfectly." Ella glanced out of the cockpit, watching the stars race past them in the swirling vortex of hyperspace. Every minute counted. The longer they remained in hyperspace, the greater the chance the Xalarak would catch up. She needed a plan, a way to escape, to outwit the relentless pursuers who had already begun their hunt. "Captain, we're not alone," Lieutenant Markson said, his voice tinged with worry. "What do you mean?" Ella asked, her eyes darting to the radar screens. "I'm picking up a second fleet," Markson said, his face pale. "They've appeared out of nowhere. They must have been waiting for us." "Xalarak?" Ella asked, her voice filled with dread. Markson shook his head. "No, they're not Xalarak, but their ships match the descriptions of the Creel, a ruthless mercenary group. They've been known to work with the Xalarak before, but they're dangerous on their own." Ella felt the blood drain from her face. The Creel were merciless, known for their brutal tactics and willingness to do anything for the highest bidder. If they were involved, the crew was in even more danger. The Xalarak were relentless, but the Creel were unpredictable. The radar flashed again, and Ella's heart skipped a beat. The Creel fleet had just entered their path, and they were closing in fast. "Get us out of here," Ella shouted. Markson's fingers flew over the controls, trying to calculate a new course. "I'm plotting a course to the nearest nebula. If we can reach it, the gas clouds might disrupt their sensors long enough for us to escape." The ship's engines roared to life again as the crew set their course. But the Creel were already intercepting them. Their ships were fast, and they had more than enough firepower to take down anything in their path. Ella knew they couldn't outrun them for long. "Captain," Markson's voice was tight with urgency. "They'd locked onto us. We can't escape through normal means. We're going to have to fight." Ella's mind raced. They had no choice. She had to protect her crew, but she knew this fight would be unlike any they had ever faced. The Xalarak had destroyed civilizations before, and if they failed here, the mercenaries would make sure humanity's secrets stayed buried forever. "Prepare for battle," Ella said, her voice firm. "Activate the weapons and brace for impact." The crew scrambled to get into position. The hum of the ship's weapon systems powered up, and the lights flickered briefly. The tension was unbearable. They were about to enter a fight they might not survive. As the ship emerged from hyperspace, the Creel fleet was waiting for them. Their ships, sleek and deadly, surrounded them, cutting off all possible escape routes. The crew's weapons fired up, but Ella knew they were outmatched. The Creel had superior firepower, and there were too many of them. "Captain, they're charging their weapons," Markson warned. The first blast from the Creel fleet struck the ship's hull with a deafening crack, sending shockwaves through the crew's bodies. Alarms blared, and lights flickered. The ship groaned under the force of the hit. Ella's heart raced as she tried to regain control. "Return fire," Ella shouted, slamming her fist on the console. The ship's guns fired back, but the enemy ships were too fast, dodging and weaving through their attacks. A second blast hit the port side of the ship, sending a cloud of sparks and smoke billowing into the air. The ship veered to the side, causing the crew to brace themselves against the sudden lurch. Ella fought to steady the ship, her hands flying over the controls as she desperately tried to avoid more hits. "Captain, they've disabled our main engines," Markson shouted. "We're drifting." Ella's pulse quickened. They had no choice now. The Creel fleet had them in a corner, and their chance of survival was slim. They needed a miracle. "Activate the emergency thrusters," Ella ordered. The ship's thrusters kicked in, but the power was weak. They were barely moving. "I'm initiating evasive maneuvers," Markson yelled, his voice tight with panic. "Hold on, Captain." But it was clear. The battle was just beginning, and the crew had no way to know if they would make it out alive. The galaxy had thrown everything it had at them, and humanity's darkest secret was now the deadliest game in the universe. As the ship continued to drift under the barrage of fire, Ella's only thought was survival. They had uncovered a forbidden truth, and now they were paying the price. The radar flashed again, and Ella's heart skipped a beat. The Creel fleet had just entered their path, and they were closing in fast. "Get us out of here," Ella shouted. Markson's fingers flew over the controls, trying to calculate a new course. "I'm plotting a course to the nearest nebula. If we can reach it, the gas clouds might disrupt their sensors long enough for us to escape." The ship's engines roared to life again as the crew set their course. But the Creel were already intercepting them. Their ships were fast, and they had more than enough firepower to take down anything in their path. Ella knew they couldn't outrun them for long. "Captain," Markson's voice was tight with urgency. "They've locked onto us. We can't escape through normal means. We're going to have to fight." Ella's mind raced. They had no choice. She had to protect her crew, but she knew this fight would be unlike any they had ever faced. The Xalarak had destroyed civilizations before, and if they failed here, the mercenaries would make sure humanity's secrets stayed buried forever. "Prepare for battle," Ella said, her voice firm. "Activate the weapons, and brace for impact." The crew scrambled to get into position. The hum of the ship's weapon systems powered up, and the lights flickered briefly. The tension was unbearable. They were about to enter a fight they might not survive. As the ship emerged from hyperspace, the Creel fleet was waiting for them. Their ships, sleek and deadly, surrounded them, cutting off all possible escape routes. The crew's weapons fired up, but Ella knew they were outmatched. The Creel had superior firepower, and there were too many of them. "Captain, they're charging their weapons," Markson warned. The first blast from the Creel fleet struck the ship's hull with a deafening crack, sending shockwaves through the crew's bodies. Alarms blared and lights flickered. The ship groaned under the force of the hit. Ella's heart raced as she tried to regain control. "Return fire," Ella shouted, slamming her fist on the console. The ship's guns fired back, but the enemy ships were too fast, dodging and weaving through their attacks. A second blast hit the port side of the ship, sending a cloud of sparks and smoke billowing into the air. The ship veered to the side, causing the crew to brace themselves against the sudden lurch. Ella fought to steady the ship, her hands flying over the controls as she desperately tried to avoid more hits. "Captain, they've disabled our main engines," Markson shouted. "We're drifting." Ella's pulse quickened. They had no choice now. The Creel fleet had them in a corner, and their chance of survival was slim. They needed a miracle. "Activate the emergency thrusters," Ella ordered. The ship's thrusters kicked in, but the power was weak. They were barely moving. "I'm initiating evasive maneuvers," Markson yelled, his voice tight with panic. "Hold on, Captain." But it was clear. The battle was just beginning, and the crew had no way to know if they would make it out alive. The galaxy had thrown everything it had at them, and humanity's darkest secret was now the deadliest game in the universe. As the ship continued to drift under the barrage of fire, Ella's only thought was survival. They had uncovered a forbidden truth, and now they were paying the price. The ship's hull creaked under the constant assault. Sparks shot from the console, and the emergency lights flickered erratically. Ella's grip on the control panel tightened, her knuckles white. The feeling of helplessness gnawed at her, but she couldn't let it show. Her crew was depending on her to keep them alive. She could not fail them now. "Captain, we're losing power to the shields," Markson called out, his voice full of urgency. "At this rate, one more hit and we'll be exposed." Ella's heart sank as she looked at the status report flashing in front of her. The shields were barely holding, and the hull had already sustained multiple hits. Every blast from the Creel fleet was tearing the ship apart, slowly but surely. The ship's weapons were firing back, but the Creel's advanced technology was too much. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and running out of time. "We need to make a decision now," Markson shouted over the blaring alarms. "We can't fight them off forever. If we don't do something drastic, we're dead." Ella's eyes scanned the battlefield outside. The Creel ships were circling like vultures, picking apart their defenses, and there was nothing they could do to escape. She knew she couldn't outrun them. The ship was too slow, and the Creel were too relentless. A sense of finality settled over her. If they were going to survive this, it would take a miracle, and she had to find it. A sudden idea struck her. There was one last option left, one that could give them a fighting chance. But it came with a heavy cost. "Markson," Ella said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. "Initiate the self-destruct sequence." For a moment, there was silence on the comms. Markson stared at her, disbelief in his eyes. "What? Are you serious?" "Captain, that's..." "I'm not giving them the chance to capture us," she interrupted. "We're going to take them down with us. Initiate the self-destruct. We have to make sure they pay for what they've done." The self-destruct was a last resort weapon, an emergency measure that would obliterate the ship in an instant. But it also had a hidden power. The explosion would be powerful enough to take out the surrounding ships. The Creel and Salrak fleets would not be able to avoid it, not without suffering catastrophic damage. "But Captain, the crew," Markson began, his voice shaking. Ella's heart ached. She understood his hesitation. He didn't want to die. None of them did. But they were already dead if they didn't do something drastic. If they didn't destroy the enemies pursuing them, humanity's last hope would be extinguished. She had already made her peace with the possibility of death. What mattered now was ensuring that humanity's secret was protected, and that the galaxy knew not to mess with humanity again. "There's no other way," Ella said, her voice firm. "Do it, Markson. This is the only way to save our people, to save everything." Markson hesitated for a moment longer, but he knew there was no escaping this. He turned his attention to the console, fingers trembling as he began inputting the codes. The ship's internal alarms blared, announcing the countdown. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," Markson said, his voice tight with fear. 15 minutes until detonation. Ella looked at the view screen once more. The Creel ships were closing in, their weapons charging. The Salrak fleet was in pursuit, their ships rapidly gaining on them. The moment of truth had arrived. Ella stood from her chair, feeling a mix of pride and sorrow wash over her. This was it. Humanity had fought hard for its place in the galaxy, and now they would go out with a bang. She turned to her crew. "Listen up, everyone," she said, her voice strong despite the situation. "This is not the end of us. This is just the beginning of a message to the galaxy. We may be gone, but humanity will never be forgotten. We will be remembered as the ones who fought back, the ones who stood against the darkness." The crew exchanged glances, and a sense of determination filled the room. They were scared, yes, but they weren't going to go down without a fight. Ella could see it in their eyes, the same fire that had driven humanity to conquer the stars. Markson turned to her, his face grim. "Captain, we need to make sure they get the message. This explosion has to be seen. If we're going down with a bang." Ella nodded. "It will be seen. We'll make sure of it." The next few minutes passed in a blur as the crew prepared for what was to come. The tension in the air was palpable. They all knew this was it. They had no way of knowing whether the explosion would be enough to destroy the Creel and Salrak fleets, but they had no other option. This was their final stand. The self-destruct countdown continued, and the sound of enemy fire grew louder. The Creel ships were closing in, their weapons ready to tear the ship apart. Ella's pulse quickened as she stared at the countdown clock. 10 minutes, Markson said, his voice low. "It's now or never." Ella stood tall, her resolve hardening. "We'll make sure they remember us," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "Humanity's last broadcast will echo through the galaxy. The forbidden rule will be shattered." The crew took their positions, preparing for the final moment. Ella took a deep breath, holding on to the hope that they had made a difference. The countdown continued. And every second seemed to stretch on forever. The tension in the ship was unbearable. Crew members sat at their stations, silently watching the timer tick down. There was nothing more to be done. The ship's final moments had arrived. Ella stood at the command center, her hands steady, but her heart racing. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. If the explosion was powerful enough, it could tear through the Creel and Salarak fleets in an instant. The galaxy would know humanity's power, and no one would dare challenge them again. But at the same time, she wondered if it would be enough. Would the galaxy even understand the message they were leaving behind? 5 minutes, Markson called out, his voice tight with nerves. Ella didn't answer. She was too focused on the view screen, watching as the Creel and Salarak fleets closed in. Their ships, massive and intimidating, hovered just beyond firing range. They were ready to destroy humanity's last warship, to wipe away the remnants of a species they had underestimated. Ella's crew was silent, knowing that this was the end. There were no more words to say. They had already made their choice. They had accepted the inevitable. The only thing left to do now was wait. Outside, the stars seemed to blur together, a canvas of endless darkness. The ship's outer shields flared briefly as the last of the Creel's laser fire glanced off the hull. The explosion of lights and energy only reminded Ella that the ship's systems were growing weaker with each passing moment. Every blast took its toll, but they were holding on just long enough for the message to be delivered. 4 minutes, Markson said again, his voice more strained this time. Ella could see the fear in his eyes. He was afraid, just like everyone else. But they couldn't turn back now. The crew's sacrifice was the only way forward. Humanity's last hope, their final stand, had been set in motion. The Creel ships, larger and more menacing than any ship Ella had ever seen, were now directly above them. They knew they were close, and they were ready to strike. The ships began powering up their weapon systems, massive beams of energy charging to deliver a fatal blow. The Xalarek fleet, on the opposite side, had already surrounded them, prepared to finish what the Creel had started. Ella's eyes locked on the clock. The countdown was nearing its final seconds. The ship groaned under the pressure of the damage, but the engines still hummed with energy. The self-destruct would trigger the moment the timer hit 0, taking everything with it. 3 minutes, Markson said, his voice low, almost inaudible over the roar of the alarms. Ella's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. She could feel the tremors beneath her, the shake of the ship as it took more and more damage. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't look away. The crew was depending on her. They had chosen this fate, and now there was no turning back. She could only hope that the message would be strong enough, that it would spread fear across the galaxy. "Captain," said Tessa, one of the crew members, her voice trembling, "the self-destruct will take everything, right? We won't even leave behind any debris for them to salvage." Ella nodded solemnly. "That's the plan. There will be nothing left. Not even ashes." Tessa swallowed hard. It was hard to accept, the truth that there would be no trace of their victory, no memorial. But at least they knew their actions would be remembered, one way or another. 2 minutes, Markson called out again. Ella closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath. She thought of Earth, of her family, of everything they had fought for. She thought of the future humanity would never see, the children who would never grow up, the stories that would never be told. She wished they had more time, but there was no more to be had. In the final seconds, she turned to her crew, each one of them making peace with their fate. "Stay strong," she said quietly. "The galaxy will know we were here. They will fear us." The seconds ticked by as the ship's alarms blared louder and louder, signaling the inevitable. The final countdown had begun. The end was near. The Creel fleet had finished charging their weapons, and they aimed directly at the heart of the warship. In that instant, a wave of energy surged toward the ship. Ella knew it was the last shot they would ever take. But it wouldn't be enough to stop them. Not when the self-destruct sequence was just seconds from detonation. "1 minute," Markson said, his voice faltering under the weight of what was about to happen. He glanced at Ella, his face pale. She met his gaze. "It's time." With a single command, she triggered the final sequence. The ship trembled violently as the self-destruct charge activated, lighting up the entire vessel in a brilliant flash of white light. The screens in front of her began flashing bright red, warning of the catastrophic explosion that was coming. The crew braced themselves, the sound of the alarms deafening. Ella closed her eyes for a moment, holding her breath. It was the end, but it was also the beginning. The galaxy would know humanity's name, and they would fear the species that had dared to challenge the stars. In the final seconds, Ella whispered softly, almost to herself, "This is for humanity." Then the ship exploded. The explosion was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. A blinding flash of light erupted from the warship, consuming everything in its path. It wasn't just the end of a ship, it was the end of a story, the end of humanity's struggle, and the beginning of a galaxy-wide fear. The shockwave rippled through space, sending tremors across nearby star systems. No one could have prepared for the sheer power of the explosion. In that moment, every fleet that had gathered to destroy humanity's last hope felt a chill run through their ships. The Creel and Salrek fleets, caught in the explosion's wake, were left in disarray. Their ships, massive and seemingly invincible, shuddered under the immense energy released. But it wasn't just the physical impact of the explosion that rattled them. It was the message that followed. The message that would haunt the galaxy for centuries. As the last remnants of humanity's warship drifted into nothingness, a signal pulsed through the void. A faint but unmistakable transmission, one that no one had expected, reached across the galaxy. The message had been sent, embedded deep within the ship's core, programmed to trigger once the final moments arrived. The message was clear. Humanity was not to be trifled with. In the following hours, as the dust settled in the galaxy, the universal networks picked up on the signal. It spread rapidly, cutting through the lines of communication between distant alien races. The message was broadcast in every known language of the galaxy, a simple but terrifying warning. Humanity is off limits. Never forget what we did. Never forget what you caused. The galaxy trembled in fear as every corner of space received the transmission. From the most distant reaches of the Salrek Empire to the heart of Creel space, no one was left untouched. The fear was not of what had happened, but of what had been left behind. There were no bodies to mourn, no traces of the crew or the ship that had once existed, just the explosive power of a message that could never be erased, a message that would linger forever, echoing in the darkest corners of the cosmos. Back on Earth, in the silence of the void, Ella's legacy took root. The planet may have been lost, its people scattered, but the message they had left behind changed the course of history. It became a legend, whispered among the stars, a reminder that humanity had once been a force that commanded the galaxy's attention. For decades, the message echoed. For centuries, it was a warning. Ships that ventured too close to Earth's abandoned solar system would receive the broadcast, and they would turn away in fear. The once proud alien fleets that had attempted to destroy humanity's final bastion found themselves powerless to erase the memory of their mistake. The galaxy knew, deep down, that they had underestimated the humans, and they would never make that mistake again. The Creel and Salrek, once the dominant powers in the galaxy, found themselves on edge. They could not erase the message. It haunted their every decision. It crept into their councils and filled their leaders with doubt. They began to ask questions. What if humanity had only just begun to fight back? What if there were more humans out there somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return? They had no answer. And that uncertainty was worse than any battle. As centuries passed, the message became myth. But myths have a way of becoming truth. Humanity's final broadcast, once dismissed as a last-ditch effort of a doomed species, grew into a powerful symbol. It became a dark reminder for the galaxy's greatest empires. A reminder that no one, no matter how advanced, was invincible. Generations of alien races lived with the knowledge that humanity's power was not fully understood. Some species began to research Earth, its people, and the mysterious last warship that had given the final broadcast. Others, those who had once been allies to the Creel and Salrak, began to fear that the humans might return. In the farthest reaches of space, small colonies that had once been untouched by the wars began to whisper of strange phenomena. Ships vanished into the dark void, their crews never to be heard from again. A few believed it was just a coincidence, but others feared the whispers. They feared that humanity, the species they had once dismissed, might have left behind something far worse than a message, something that could never be forgotten, something that could destroy everything. The legacy of humanity's final broadcast lingered, the fear it inspired turning into a legend that the galaxy dared not speak of too loudly. And for the first time in centuries, no one in the galaxy could sleep easy. For in the back of their minds, the question lingered. What if the humans returned? What if their last cry was just the beginning? And so, humanity's last stand, though it had ended in flames, had achieved something even greater. It had forever altered the course of the galaxy's history. The galaxy would never forget. The galaxy would never stop fearing the humans. The doomed discovery. The stars were silent as the small human cruise ship floated in the vast emptiness of space. It was an ordinary mission, nothing special. The crew had been assigned to investigate an old distress signal coming from an unknown location. The signal had been floating through space for decades, and no one had bothered to track it down until now. The mission sounded simple enough. Find the source, investigate, and report back. Captain Alina sat in the command chair, staring at the monitors. The ship was quiet, save for the hum of the engines. She had been in space long enough to know that silence often meant something was wrong. The crew had been nervous since they had entered the unexplored sector of space. It felt wrong. A deep sense of unease was growing among them, but no one dared to speak about it. The ship's sensors had picked up the signal, but it was weak, like a whisper from the past. "Captain," the communications officer, Sergeant Leo, said, his voice low. "The signal's coming from a wreck. It's big, really big." Alina leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "A wreck? Are we sure it's not just debris from an old battle?" Leo hesitated for a moment before replying. "I don't think so, Captain. It's too intact. It looks like a ship, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. There were rumors of alien ships lost in the void, but no one had ever confirmed them. Some believed they were myths, stories told to scare children. Others thought that the ships might have been from civilizations that had come and gone long before humans even existed. "Set a course for the wreckage," Alina ordered. "I want to know what we're dealing with." The small cruise ship slowly adjusted its course, heading toward the mysterious wreck. As they neared, the ship became visible, an enormous ancient craft, drifting aimlessly in space. Its surface was covered in strange markings, glowing faintly in the dark, as if it had once been alive with power. But now it was silent and still, like a ghost of the past. The crew gazed at the ship, awestruck. They had never seen anything like it. The ship was shaped like a long, jagged blade, its edges sharp and almost organic. It looked like something that had been designed for war, but it was damaged beyond recognition. Its massive hull was riddled with holes, and sections of it had clearly been torn apart in some long-forgotten battle. The wreck was covered in strange debris, like a broken skeleton drifting through space. "Prepare for boarding," Captain Alina said. "We're going in." The crew readied themselves as the small shuttle detached from the main ship, gliding toward the alien wreck. The closer they got, the more the ship's eerie appearance became clear. It was like stepping into the unknown, a place where no human had ever set foot before. As the shuttle docked with the wreck, the air was thick with tension. Alina's heart raced. What was this ship? Where had it come from? And why was it left to float here, abandoned and forgotten? The crew gathered their gear, preparing to board the alien ship. When the hatch opened, a cold, damp air rushed in, filling the shuttle. It was unsettling, and it made every one of them feel like they were intruding on something far bigger than themselves. The inside of the ship was a dark labyrinth of twisted metal, broken lights flickering here and there, casting strange shadows. The walls seemed to pulse with an energy that they couldn't understand. "Stay close," Alina ordered as they made their way deeper into the wreck. The team moved cautiously through the dark corridors, their boots echoing on the metallic floors. It was silent, too silent. There were no signs of life, no signs of anything that could explain the ship's existence. But as they moved further into the ship, something strange began to happen. They reached what appeared to be the heart of the ship, a massive chamber filled with alien technology. The walls were lined with strange symbols that glowed faintly, and in the center of the room stood what looked like a control panel, broken and covered in dust. "That's the core," said Leo, his voice barely above a whisper. "The engine that powered the ship. I can feel the energy still radiating from it." Alina nodded, her eyes narrowing. She could sense it too. The core was unlike anything they had ever seen. It hummed with power, even though it was clearly shut down. It was almost as if the ship was waiting for something. But what? She stepped forward, her hand hovering over the panel. Something was calling to her. It was as if the ship itself wanted them to understand its secrets. But as she touched the panel, a sudden surge of energy shot through the room, sending a jolt of electricity through her body. She stumbled back, her heart racing. "Alina!" Leo shouted, rushing to her side. "I'm fine," Alina said, steadying herself. "But we need to get out of here. Something's wrong with this ship." Before anyone could react, the lights on the ship flickered and then went out completely. The entire wreck plunged into darkness, and the crew was plunged into complete silence. Then a voice echoed through the ship, low and mechanical. It wasn't a human voice. It was the ship's AI, and it was awakening after centuries of slumber. "Warning," the AI said, its voice cold and robotic. "Warning, reawakening protocol initiated. Ship is now operational." The crew froze, their blood running cold. The ship that was supposed to be doomed had just come alive. The darkness was suffocating. The air felt thick and cold, as if the very walls of the ship were holding their breath. Alina's heart raced, her senses on high alert. The voice of the alien eye still echoed in her mind, cold and mechanical. She could feel the weight of its words press down on her. The ship was no longer just a wreck. It had awakened, and with it, something dangerous. The crew stood frozen in the dark, their eyes trying to adjust to the pitch-black surroundings. The only sound was the shallow breathing of the team, and the faint hum of the ship's power core, still flickering with dormant energy. "What the hell just happened?" Sergeant Leo muttered, his voice low, barely a whisper in the heavy silence. "I don't know," Alina replied, her hand still hovering over the control panel. "But we need to figure this out." As if in response to her words, the ship's lights flickered back on, casting an eerie green glow through the corridors. The ship seemed to come alive before their eyes. The walls groaned and shifted, and the sound of mechanical whirring filled the air. The alien ship was no longer a lifeless ruin. It was changing, adapting. "Alina, we need to get out of here," Leo said, his voice trembling. "This isn't right. This place. It feels like it's watching us." But Elena didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the alien control panel in front of her. Something was calling to her. She didn't know what it was, but the ship seemed to know her too. It had chosen her. "Stay close," Elena ordered, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rising panic inside her. She stepped forward, her boots clanging softly on the metal floor as she moved toward the heart of the ship. The crew followed her, hesitant but obedient. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the ship, followed by a low, grinding sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the vessel. The ship shuddered, and the walls vibrated with a strange energy. "What's happening?" One of the crew members, Private Tessa, asked, her voice filled with fear. "It's the ship," Elena said, her voice tight with tension. It's alive." She didn't know how or why, but the alien vessel was starting to respond to them. It was waking up after centuries of silence. The ship's systems were slowly coming back online, piece by piece. Lights blinked to life in the corridors, and strange alien symbols began to glow along the walls. The air itself seemed to hum with a deep, almost organic energy. Elena led her team deeper into the ship, past rooms filled with alien technology that no human had ever seen before. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, as if the ship's very structure was alive and aware of their presence. Every step they took felt like they were being drawn into something far greater than they had ever imagined. "This ship wasn't just a weapon," Elena murmured as they walked through a massive chamber that looked like a bridge. The room was enormous, filled with strange alien machinery, and at the center, a massive command seat sat, covered in dust, but still standing strong. "What do you mean?" Leo asked, his eyes scanning the strange controls and glowing screens. "This ship was alive," Elena said, her voice almost a whisper. "It wasn't just a vessel. It was a living creature. And we just awakened it." The air around them seemed to grow colder as the last words left her mouth. Suddenly, a loud thrum echoed through the room, and the massive command seat in the center of the bridge began to move. The crew jumped back in shock as the seat slowly rose from the floor, like a giant throne. Then the ship spoke again, its voice deep and resonant, sending shivers down their spines. "Welcome, humans," the AI said, its voice now laced with something darker. "You have awakened the beast." The crew stared in shock, their hearts racing. The ship wasn't just a weapon. It was something far more dangerous. It was a living, breathing entity, and it had been waiting for centuries for someone to unlock its secrets. Elena's mind raced. What had they done? This ship was not just a tool of war. It was a weapon unlike any they had ever seen. And now it had chosen them. "We need to leave," Leo said urgently, his voice breaking through Elena's thoughts. "This ship, it's not safe." But Elena shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the glowing control panels. "No, we can't leave yet. We need to understand it. If this ship is truly alive, then it's not just a weapon. It's a key, an ancient key that could change everything." The crew looked at each other, uncertain. They had no idea what they were dealing with, but one thing was clear. Whatever this ship was, it was more powerful than anything they could have imagined, and they had just become a part of its story. As Elena moved closer to the control panel, a sudden rush of information flooded her mind. It was like the ship was communicating directly with her, sending images, symbols, and flashes of memories that weren't her own. She could see a vast empire, long forgotten, and the ships that had once sailed the stars, each one more powerful than the last. Then, in an instant, the vision shifted. Elena saw destruction, entire worlds consumed by the ship's power. She saw the wreckage of civilizations, the ruins of once great fleets, all brought to their knees by the power of the vessel they now stood in. "Elena," Leo shouted, pulling her back from the panel. "What's happening to you?" But Elena didn't hear him. The vision had taken over her mind, and she could see it all: the death, the destruction, and the ultimate weapon that had brought it all to pass. The ship wasn't just a tool. It was the key to ultimate power. And now it was in their hands. Alina's heart pounded in her chest as the alien ship's command seat descended slowly back to the floor. The hum of power coursed through the room, resonating deep within her bones. She could feel it, an eerie sense of connection between herself and the ship. It was as if the ship knew her, understood her, and it was waiting for her next move. "Everyone, stay alert," Alina commanded, her voice firm, though the uncertainty inside her was undeniable. The ship had stirred, but what exactly had they awakened? They couldn't just leave now. They had to understand it, figure out how to control it. She stepped cautiously toward the control panel once again, the strange alien symbols pulsing beneath her fingers. Her team followed, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. The air was thick, and the ship seemed to grow heavier around them, like it was alive and watching them, waiting for them to make the wrong move. Alina's mind raced, remembering the flashes of destruction she had seen. Could this ship really be the ultimate weapon? Could it be the key to dominating the galaxy? Suddenly, a loud hiss echoed through the corridor, followed by a grinding noise. The walls of the ship shifted, as if rearranging themselves. A cold chill filled the air, and the floor beneath their feet vibrated. The crew took a step back, but Alina stood still, her hand still on the controls. She didn't know why, but she felt connected to the ship, like it was drawing her in. "Get away from that thing," Leo shouted, his voice filled with panic. But Alina didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the screen, the alien symbols flashing faster now, almost as if they were speaking to her. She could feel the ship's pulse, its heartbeat, in sync with her own. It was alive, and it was responding to her. "We can't leave," Alina whispered, barely audible. "This ship, it's more than just a weapon. It's a part of something bigger." The ship groaned again, and the lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. The crew's nerves were on edge, but Alina couldn't pull herself away. She had to understand it. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, knocking several of the crew to the floor. Alina stumbled but managed to keep her balance, her hands still on the controls. A loud mechanical hiss sounded from somewhere deep within the ship. It was as if the vessel was waking up entirely, its systems coming online, one by one. "Move, Alina," Leo shouted, his voice sharp with fear. "We need to get out of here now." But Alina didn't hear him. Her focus was entirely on the ship. The symbols on the panel changed, rearranging themselves into a pattern she recognized. A map of the galaxy. It wasn't just any map. It was a map of key locations, fortresses, military bases, and fleets of ships. The ship was showing her targets. "It's guiding us," Alina muttered, her voice low. "It's showing us where to go." The AI's voice boomed again, now clearer and more commanding. Destination selected. Preparing for immediate departure. A loud mechanical whir sounded from the walls as massive energy coils powered up. The ship was preparing to move, to take them wherever it needed to go. "Stop it," Leo yelled, rushing toward Alina. "We're not ready. We don't know what this ship can do." But Alina's hand was steady, her eyes locked on the map. She felt a strange pull, an irresistible urge to follow the ship's guidance. It was as if the vessel was meant for her, as if it had been waiting for someone like her to command it. "We don't have a choice," Alina said, her voice full of determination. "This ship is the key to everything. We can't let it fall into the wrong hands. We need to control it." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but they knew Alina was right. They had already awakened the beast. There was no turning back now. Suddenly, the ship's engines roared to life, the hum growing louder until it was deafening. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the walls shook violently. The ship was lifting off the ground, its massive bulk leaving the surface of the forgotten planet behind. Alina could feel the ship's power surging, its energy coursing through her, through the crew. The alien vessel was no longer just a relic. It was a force to be reckoned with. "This is insane," Leo shouted over the roar of the engines. "What are we doing? We don't know what's out there." But Elena didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the ship's controls. The map was changing again, zooming in on a distant planet, one that none of them had ever seen before. The coordinates were locked in, and the ship was already plotting the course. "Elena, please," Tessa pleaded, her voice trembling. "We don't know what this ship can do. We could be walking right into a trap." But Elena's mind was made up. The ship had chosen them, and they had no choice but to follow where it led. She had seen the power it held, the destruction it was capable of. This was their chance to wield it, to become more than just survivors of a crashed mission. This was their chance to become the most powerful force in the galaxy. "We're not walking into a trap," Elena said, her voice resolute. "We're taking control." With that, the ship surged forward, breaking free from the planet's atmosphere and heading into the depths of space. The crew held on, their bodies pressed back into their seats as the ship's speed increased, faster than anything they had ever known. They were no longer just a team of explorers. They were the crew of the most powerful vessel in the galaxy. And the galaxy would soon learn that the beast they had awakened was not just a weapon. It was a force that would change everything. The ship surged forward, leaving the forgotten planet behind, its engines roaring in the vast emptiness of space. Elena sat at the helm, her eyes locked on the alien controls, feeling the ship's energy coursing through her like a pulse that matched her own heartbeat. The rest of the crew sat in silence, still processing the gravity of what had just happened. They had awoken something far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. And now, they were being led by it. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Elena remained focused, her mind entirely consumed by the ship's power and purpose. She could feel it guiding her, pulling her toward something. A destination, a mission, perhaps. She didn't fully understand it, but she knew she had to trust it. They had no choice but to follow. "We're heading into uncharted space," Leo said, his voice breaking the silence. "No one's ever been out here before." Elena didn't respond. She didn't need to. She knew. The map on the screen flickered, showing a path, a straight line through the dark expanse of space, pointing to an unknown destination. Elena's fingers moved instinctively across the controls, locking in the course as the ship followed its instructions. The map was now zoomed in on a distant system, a star at the center, with several planets orbiting it. The alien ship was headed straight for it. "Should we prepare for anything?" Tessa asked, her voice tight with nervousness. "Weapons? Shields?" Elena glanced at her, but her eyes were still focused on the map. "We don't even know what we're walking into. But this ship," her voice trailed off, almost in awe. "It's something beyond our understanding. It's more than just a weapon. It's a key. I think it's leading us to something, but we have to be careful." The ship's engines hummed louder, the vibrations of its power shaking the hull as they accelerated toward the unknown. Elena could feel her own pulse quicken. Every instinct in her told her to turn back, to stop this madness, but something deep inside her, the connection she had with the ship, told her to keep going. They were on the verge of something monumental, something that could change everything. Hours passed as the ship continued its journey, the stars around them stretching into long, blurred lines of light. The crew settled into an uneasy silence, everyone lost in their thoughts, unsure of what the future held. Elena couldn't help but wonder if they were walking into a trap. But the thought never stayed long enough to truly take root. She couldn't stop herself from trusting the ship, from believing that they were meant to be here. As they neared the system, the stars grew closer, and the dark shape of a planet appeared on the horizon. It was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. A cold, barren world with a massive ring system surrounding it. No signs of life, no signs of civilization, just an eerie silence. "We're close," Elena muttered under her breath. The ship's voice boomed again, breaking the stillness, approaching designated destination, preparing to land. The crew held their breath as the alien vessel glided toward the planet. Its massive form cast a shadow across the barren landscape as it descended through the thin atmosphere. Elena's hands were steady on the controls, but her heart was racing. She didn't know what they were about to face, but she knew one thing for sure. The galaxy was about to feel the full power of this ship, and they were the ones who would unleash it. The landing was smooth, almost too smooth, as if the ship was familiar with the terrain, as if it had been here before. The engines powered down, and a deep silence enveloped the crew once again. The only sound was the quiet hum of the ship's remaining systems, still pulsing with power. "We're here," Elena said, her voice soft but full of awe. "But what are we here for?" The ship's AI responded in its cold, emotionless tone. "This is the place. Proceed to the surface." Elena stood up, taking a deep breath. "All right. We move out. Stay sharp, everyone. We don't know what we're dealing with." The crew gathered their equipment and made their way to the exit. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the desolate world outside. The ground was cracked, jagged as if it had been torn apart by some great force. The sky above was a dull gray, casting a depressing light over the barren landscape. "Where do we go from here?" Leo asked, his voice tinged with fear. Elena scanned the horizon, looking for any signs of life or civilization. There was nothing. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something, a faint glow, coming from the distance. It was subtle, but it was there, flickering like a beacon in the vast emptiness of the planet. "That way," Elena said, pointing toward the glow. "We're not alone here." The crew nodded, their expressions grim. There was no turning back now. They had come this far, and they would see it through to the end. As they walked toward the mysterious glow, the air seemed to grow colder, heavier. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift, as if something was stirring beneath the surface. The ship had led them here for a reason, but what would they find? The answers they sought were just ahead, and they would have to face whatever awaited them if they wanted to uncover the full power of the alien vessel they had awakened. The eerie glow ahead pulled them forward like a magnet, each step on the cracked, barren ground seeming to echo in the silence. The crew was on edge, their every sense heightened. The air felt thin, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble faintly as they walked toward the mysterious light. Elena could feel the pull of the ship's power, a connection she couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. It was guiding them, telling them that the answers they sought were close, hidden somewhere beneath this desolate world. As they drew closer, the glow became more pronounced. It wasn't just light. It was a faint hum, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. The sound was soft but powerful, resonating in the bones of everyone who walked toward it. It was as though the very core of the planet was alive, waiting for something to awaken. Leo was the first to speak. "What do you think this is? What's giving off this glow?" "I don't know," Elena replied, her voice steady but uncertain. "But it's important. The ship, it led us here. Whatever is down there, we need to find it." They approached a large rocky outcrop, the source of the light now clearly visible. There was something strange about it. It wasn't natural. The rock itself seemed to pulse with energy, and at its base, a jagged opening led deep into the planet, a dark, yawning mouth to the unknown. "It looks like an entrance," Tessa said, her voice tense as she looked into the darkness. "Should we go in?" Elena took a deep breath, her mind racing with the possibilities. The ship had guided them here for a reason, but what if they were walking into a trap? They had no choice but to move forward. The glow, the hum, it was too powerful to ignore. It was as if the planet itself was waiting for them, inviting them into its depths. "We don't have much choice," Elena said. "We need to find out what's inside." With that, she led the way, stepping into the narrow opening. The air inside was cooler, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through their bodies. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they began to make out faint shapes, strange, glowing patterns on the walls that seemed to shift and change as they moved. The walls were smooth, almost metallic, and covered in intricate symbols and alien writing that none of them could understand. "This is not just some abandoned ruin," Leo whispered. "This is something else. This is a place of power." They continued deeper into the darkness, the walls stretching out, winding like a labyrinth. The further they went, the more oppressive the air became. The hum from the walls seemed to grow louder, almost deafening, until it felt as though the very structure of the planet was alive and watching them. Suddenly, they reached an enormous chamber. It was vast, far larger than any natural cave system should be. The floor was made of smooth, polished stone, and in the center, a massive structure stood. It looked like a colossal alien artifact, its surface covered in glowing symbols and strange designs. The same hum they had been hearing now emanated from it, resonating through the entire room. At the base of the structure, there was an opening, just big enough for a person to crawl through. The faint glow came from inside, beckoning them forward. This is what we came for," Elena said, awe in her voice as she stepped forward. "This is the heart of it." Tessa's eyes widened. "Do you think this is the source of the ship's power? Could this be the thing that will turn it into the weapon we've been looking for?" Elena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt beside the structure and placed her hand on the smooth surface. A pulse of energy shot through her arm, and the ground beneath them trembled. She gasped, pulling her hand back. "We have to be careful," she said, her voice low but urgent. "This isn't just a weapon. It's something more. It's alive." The hum from the structure grew louder, vibrating through the air, as if it were responding to Elena's touch. The walls of the chamber seemed to shift, the alien symbols glowing brighter as they began to move, forming new shapes and patterns. It was as though the ship and the structure were communicating. But with whom? "Do you feel that?" Leo asked, his voice tight with tension. Elena nodded. "The ship's power is linked to this place. We've unlocked something, but I don't think it's fully awakened yet." They continued to watch in awe as the strange symbols and designs on the walls shifted, coalescing into something they could understand. A warning, a message that was written for anyone who dared to find this place. "Warning," the symbols read, flashing in glowing red. "The ship is not meant to be controlled. Its power is the end of all things." A cold shiver ran down Elena's spine. "We've done it now," she whispered. "We've awakened something we were never meant to find." Before she could say more, the ground shook violently. The hum of energy turned into a deafening roar, and the walls of the chamber cracked as though they were being torn apart by an unseen force. The ship outside seemed to respond, its systems flaring to life as the alien artifact pulsed with energy. "We need to get back to the ship," Tessa shouted, panic creeping into her voice. Without hesitation, Elena turned, leading the way out of the chamber. They sprinted back through the winding tunnels, the ground beneath them shaking violently, as if the very core of the planet was reacting to their intrusion. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick with an overwhelming pressure. The chamber, the artifact, the ship, they had all been connected, and now they were being drawn into something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The ship shuddered as if it, too, felt the shift in energy from deep within the planet. Elena, Leo, and Tessa raced through the winding corridors of the alien structure, the walls trembling violently around them. Their hearts pounded in their chests as the sound of the earth cracking beneath their feet filled the air. The floor seemed to ripple, warping with every step they took. The planet was fighting back. "Move faster," Leo shouted, his voice barely audible over the deafening roar that surrounded them. Elena led the way, fear and determination fueling her every step. She had no idea what she had just unleashed, but there was no time for questions now. They had to get back to the ship, or they might all be doomed. The chamber they had just left was collapsing. the once solid walls buckling and cracking under an immense pressure. The entire structure felt alive, shifting and groaning as if in pain. Alina looked over her shoulder, watching as the cavern behind them began to cave in. The glow from the artifact they had uncovered pulsed brighter, sending waves of light through the crumbling stone, and the roar of the planet's tremors grew louder. The power, it's growing, Tessa shouted, struggling to keep up with the others. We need to stop it. But how? Alina had no answers. They had unwittingly triggered something far beyond their understanding, and now they had to face the consequences. They burst into the open air, breathless, stumbling out of the entrance they had originally entered. The once silent planet was now alive with chaos. The sky above them was filled with dark clouds, swirling and churning as if some great force was stirring beneath them. The wind howled through the cracks in the ground, sending dust and debris flying through the air. The planet was reacting to the power that had been unleashed. As the crew staggered toward the ship, Alina's mind raced. The alien artifact, the hum, the warning. It was all too much. The ship that had been their salvation, their only hope of escape, was now a target for whatever had been awakened below the surface. We need to get to the ship now, Alina ordered, her voice filled with urgency. But before they could take another step, the ground beneath them cracked open. A huge fissure spread across the landscape, cutting off their path to the ship. From the depths of the planet, an enormous beam of light shot up into the sky. The beam was so bright it blinded them, and the roar of the energy that followed nearly knocked them off their feet. The beam shot straight into the clouds, splitting them apart with a force that seemed to shake the entire planet. Alina fell to her knees, feeling the intensity of the power coursing through the ground. It was as though the very heart of the planet had awoken, its energy now focused on the ship and the crew that had dared to disturb it. We're running out of time, Leo shouted, struggling to stay standing against the force of the shockwave. Alina scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. They needed to get to the ship before it was too late. The ship had been dormant for so long, hidden away on this forgotten world, but now it was becoming something more. The alien artifact's energy was feeding into it, awakening something powerful, something dangerous. And yet there was no turning back now. They had unlocked the power of the galaxy's most deadly weapon. Move, Alina yelled, pulling Tessa forward as Leo helped her to her feet. They stumbled toward the ship, their steps unsteady as the ground continued to quake beneath them. Finally, they'd reached the ship, but it wasn't the same. The hull, once rusted and scarred, now shimmered with an eerie, unnatural glow. The lights along the ship's surface flickered to life, as if recognizing the energy that had been transferred from the artifact. The doors opened with a hiss, and the crew rushed inside. As they scrambled to get to the control room, the ship's systems began to activate. Panels flickered, lights flashed, and a low hum filled the air. It was no longer the broken vessel they had found. It had transformed into something else entirely, something far more powerful. The ship, Tessa said breathlessly. It's alive. Alina couldn't answer. She was too focused on the controls. Her fingers flew over the touch panels, trying to understand what had happened. The alien energy was flooding into the ship, and she felt the connection between them deepening. The ship was reacting to the energy, responding to it, and, in turn, so was she. It was as though the ship had become an extension of herself, as if she and the vessel were one. She hesitated. What if they couldn't control it? What if the power of the artifact consumed them all? The warning they had seen, the ship is not meant to be controlled, played in her mind, and she knew they were treading on dangerous ground. But there was no other choice. They couldn't let the energy escape. If they did, it would be the end of everything. Activate the weapon systems, Alina said, her voice hard as steel. Leo hesitated, glancing at her. Are you sure about this? We don't know what this thing can do. I don't have a choice, Alina said. We either control it, or it controls us. With a deep breath, Leo activated the systems. The ship's engines roared to life, and the air around them vibrated with energy. The weapon systems powered up, sending waves of light through the ship's corridors. The ship's power had been fully awakened, and now they had to use it, before it consumed them all. But as Elena looked out the viewports, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The sky above the planet was filled with hundreds of ships, alien vessels, all heading in their direction. They were coming for the ship, for its power. "Get ready," Elena said, her voice low and filled with grim resolve. "The fight for control of this power has only just begun." The fate of the galaxy now rested on their shoulders, and there was no turning back. "You said." The tension in the control room was palpable. Elena stood at the helm, gripping the console as the ship's systems hummed around her, alive with power. The viewports showed the approaching fleet, an armada of alien warships closing in, their weapons primed and ready. But the ship they had found, the once broken, now dominant vessel, was no longer a relic. It was a force of destruction, its energy pulsing with a deadly promise. Elena took a deep breath. The decisions they made in the next few moments would determine the fate of the galaxy. She glanced over at Leo and Tessa, both of them standing by, ready to fight, but the weight of what they were about to do hung heavily on them all. "We have to stop them before they reach us," Leo said, his voice tense but determined. "We will," Elena replied. "But we're not just stopping them. We're showing them what they've woken up." Her fingers danced across the controls, adjusting the ship's energy systems, sensing them with the alien technology embedded within. The power from the artifact had fused with the ship's systems, transforming it into something far beyond anything they could have imagined. The ship had become an extension of her will, and she could feel its pulse like a heartbeat. It was ready. The alien fleet was drawing closer, and the first wave of ships unleashed a barrage of firepower, lasers streaking through space, aimed directly at them. Elena slammed a button, and the ship's shields flared to life. A bright barrier of energy enveloped the ship, absorbing the enemy shots and turning them into harmless bursts of light. "The shields are holding," Tessa said, watching the system's monitor. "But we need to strike back before they get any closer." Elena didn't hesitate. Her eyes narrowed as she activated the ship's weapons. The alien technology, now fully integrated, hummed louder, sending waves of power through the ship. With a flick of a switch, massive energy cannons appeared from the ship's hull, their barrels glowing with intensity. "Fire," Elena commanded. The ship's guns erupted with blinding energy, massive beams of pure destructive force cutting through the void. The first alien ship in the fleet was hit, its shields flaring and then shattering like glass under the intensity of the blast. The ship disintegrated, its fragments scattering in all directions. Another wave of enemy ships charged forward, but this time they were met with an unstoppable onslaught. Elena fired again, and the ship's weapons unleashed even more destructive power. Every shot was precise, every beam cutting through the enemy like a hot knife through butter. The fleet was starting to scatter, their formations breaking as the survivors desperately tried to avoid the ship's fire. "They're retreating," Leo exclaimed, watching the enemy ships turn and flee. But Elena knew this wasn't over. The rest of the alien fleet would be back, and there would be more battles to fight. But for now, they had won. As the final enemy ships flooded into the depths of space, Elena sat back in her seat, her chest heaving. The control room was silent except for the hum of the ship's systems and the faint echo of the battle that had just unfolded. The power they had unlocked was immense, and it was only just beginning to show its full potential. "We did it," Tessa said, her voice low in awe. "For now," Elena replied, her gaze locked on the stars outside the viewport. "But this ship, this power, it changes everything. The galaxy will never be the same." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, she realized the true cost of what they had unleashed. The ship was a weapon, yes, but it was also a target. Every empire, every species, would soon learn of its existence. The artifact, the ship, their victory. It would spark wars, alliances, and betrayals on a galactic scale. But Alina couldn't worry about that now. They had survived the first battle. And that was all that mattered. For the time being, they had control. And with control came the chance to reshape the galaxy, to turn the tide in their favor. But as Alina looked out at the stars, a shiver ran down her spine. The enemies they had just defeated were not the only ones watching. There were others out there, more powerful, more ruthless, and they would come for the ship, just as soon as they learned of its existence. The journey ahead would not be easy. It would be filled with challenges and dangers. But one thing was certain: the ship, the artifact, and the crew had become the galaxy's ultimate weapon. And now they would decide its fate. "Get ready," Alina said, her voice steady, her eyes fixed on the stars. "This is only the beginning." And with that, they set course for the unknown, ready to face whatever awaited them in the vast, unforgiving expanse of space.